The metal glint on the tide line stopped the patrolman cold, a delicate bracelet half buried in salt-stiff sand, its clasp twisted as if torn away in haste, the morning surf whispering against it in slow, rhythmic pulls that felt less like waves and more like disclosure, to stunned silence, alone. If you like stories like this, make sure to subscribe and like the video. Miami Beach in July 1976 was already bracing beneath the weight of a heat wave, the air thick with salt and gasoline from the causeways that funneled visitors toward neon hotels and shoreline amusements. The bracelet, retrieved carefully by latex-gloved hands, bore an inscription that would anchor the next 7 months of investigative uncertainty. Initials, 2 letters, an understated etching indicating an expensive jeweler on Collins Avenue. Police canvassed the store, tracing purchase slips back to a 21-year-old woman reported missing only 36 hours earlier. The name, appearing in looping handwriting on a purchase ledger, was Sarah Donnelly, a recent graduate working part-time at a beachfront art gallery known for its tourist watercolor sets and quiet afternoon hours. Her absence had barely rippled through the community. She had no arrest record, no known disputes, and no history of sudden disappearance. Yet the bracelet, sand-abraded but unmistakably hers, suggested a break in her predictable coastline routine. Investigators pieced together Sarah's final verified movements with the restraint expected in an era before expansive databases and cross-state digital access. Gallery records showed her clocking out near dusk after an uneventful shift, where she reportedly prepared exhibit pamphlets during slow customer cycles. That evening, she was scheduled to attend a colleague's gathering but never arrived, and no witnesses recalled seeing her on the prominent sidewalk stretch between her workplace and her small efficiency apartment off Washington Avenue. The discovery of her bracelet on a quiet stretch of beach, far from her usual route, sharpened the inquiry from a missing person report to suspected foul play, without any explicit forensic violence required to justify the shift in classification. Miami Beach police, accustomed to tourist thefts and occasional seasonal disappearances, found themselves managing a case that advanced with neither theatricality nor lead suspect. The tide conditions on the morning of discovery were documented meticulously. A marine unit reconstructed overnight current flow, noting that the bracelet could have migrated downshore, but likely not over any significant distance without visible conditions altering it more severely. Sand grains were analyzed, their mineral profile indicating deposition directly on that section of beach, rather than transport from a distant inlet. Forensics documented the clasp not as broken by forceful trauma, but as stressed and separated, a detail later mirrored by lab results showing microstriations consistent with a deliberate, hurried removal rather than corrosion. Investigators studied the jewelry store's customer logs, identifying the man who purchased the bracelet with Sarah 2 months earlier, a colleague from the gallery who confirmed the item as a birthday gift she had chosen and cherished. The man was cleared quickly, his alibi verified with understated efficiency. He was hosting an out-of-town curator the night of her disappearance, supported by hotel records and symposium schedules. Local media, constrained by the absence of scandalous material, published brief columns. The Miami Herald issued a 2-paragraph notice, citing cooperation with investigators and avoiding conjecture. Flyers were stapled to telephone poles along Ocean Drive and in Emerson Park, showing Sarah's soft features and the kind of composed smile typically reserved for yearbook portraits rather than emergency bulletins. Her family, located in Gainesville, arrived and sat through procedural interviews in unadorned precinct rooms kept intentionally cool against the Florida swelter. The gallery owner provided employment documentation, and confirmed that Sarah handled closing duties without issue. No cash discrepancies emerged, and no signs pointed toward workplace conflict. In August, tide charts indicated mild storm interference, and small debris collected along the coastal stretch was analyzed. Among routine shells and seaweed fragments, a pale cloth scrap emerged, determined to be cotton from a blouse similar to one Sarah wore. Fibers matched laundry tag fragments found in her apartment hamper, and though not determinative, they tightened the spatial focus of her disappearance. Law enforcement turned to vehicle logs, interviewing lifeguards stationed along the beach footpaths and documenting a maroon sedan observed leaving the area near twilight the evening she vanished. Without license plate clarity, the detail remained suspended in case notes for 2 months, a placeholder awaiting corroboration. Autumn brought cooler winds to South Florida and a renewed push. Analysts cross-referenced hotel guest logs with rental car ledgers, identifying 2 out-of-state vehicles matching partial witness recollections. 1. A sedan with faded maroon paint, tracked back to a traveling medical conference attendee registered under a temporary Miami Beach address. The man, a physician from St. Louis, had no apparent connection to Sarah until investigators uncovered his gallery visit on the day of her disappearance. He signed a receipt for a small print, time-stamped just before Sarah's shift ended. Gallery staff remembered him as polite, quiet, purchasing a modest watercolor of the shoreline. These quiet alignments began to compress the investigation's perimeter. In early December, forensic re-examination of the bracelet uncovered a second inscription on the inner band, nearly erased by salt abrasion, a date corresponding to Sarah's birthday, followed by minute etching inconsistent with the jeweler's work. Specialists confirmed that the added engraving had been executed by an amateur tool, not the high-end equipment typical of Collins Avenue merchants. This detail redirected attention from the gift purchased toward a subsequent, unauthorized modification. Further inquiry into local key cutting and small engraving kiosks located a mall booth employee who maintained limited records. He recalled a man requesting discreet alterations to a bracelet weeks before Sarah vanished. His description, provided without sensational coloration, aligned precisely with the medical conference attendee. The ensuing interview, coordinated discreetly to avoid media escalation, unfolded in a conference room of the Miami-Dade Courthouse Annex. Investigators reviewed travel logs, gallery receipts, and booth engraver statements. Under methodical questioning, the physician admitted brief acquaintance with Sarah, acknowledging multiple gallery visits not documented in initial statements. Hotel staff corroborated that he requested ocean view seating in the lobby cafe during her shifts. No dramatics accompanied the confession of familiarity. It was delivered with clinical reserve. Search warrants authorized a review of his rented sedan, now returned to a St. Louis agency. Beneath the seat, fibers consistent with Sarah's blouse, as well as sand matching the Miami Beach sample profile, were located. The forensic sequence closed with laboratory confirmation in late January 1977. Paint trace from the sedan aligned with minute transfer on the bracelet clasp, likely occurring when the item was removed near the vehicle on the quiet beach path. With combined evidentiary weight, fiber matches, engraved alterations, gallery visit timeline, and vehicle trace, the case transitioned to arrest. The physician was extradited to Florida, charged with unlawful confinement and homicide based on circumstantial but convergent evidence that satisfied prosecutorial thresholds in an era before DNA dominance. Miami courtroom proceedings avoided spectacle. Reporters documented the trial in subdued tones, focusing on procedural clarity rather than emotional theatrics. Conviction was secured in March. the sentence issued as life imprisonment without parole under state guidelines. Sarah's family remained composed during the verdict reading, their presence quiet but resolute. The bracelet, restored and sealed in protective casing, was transferred to them during a brief courthouse meeting devoid of flash photography or media intrusion. The beach where it was found resumed its tourist rhythms, the tide erasing footprints and patrol markers alike. Case files settled into the archival stacks of Miami Beach Police Department, cataloged by incident number and year, referenced occasionally by training officers studying the incremental steadiness of mid-century forensic work. The resolution, anchored by a single recovered object and disciplined investigation, left the shoreline unchanged but the record complete. The sentencing concluded without applause, outburst, or any language that would disrupt the procedural gravity of the courtroom. Miami's coastal humidity pressed against the windows of the Dade County Courthouse as spectators dispersed, some returning to beachfront hotels, others to office districts where the case had been discussed in subdued hallways for months. The conviction itself had arrived not as a dramatic twist, but as a quiet summation of patient forensic layering, an assemblage of sand grains, fiber cross-sections, engraving tool marks, and vehicle residue that formed a stable bridge between uncertainty and legal resolution. The bracelet that had begun the investigation remained the symbolic hinge of the file, its location on the tide line determining the pace, direction, and eventual closure of 7 months of coordinated work. Investigators noted privately that no singular confession, no revelatory outburst, and no lay tower informant had carried the weight. Instead, the case exemplified methodical Miami Beach procedure at a time when coastal tourism expanded faster than administrative infrastructure, and missing persons inquiries often drowned under seasonal population flux. Media coverage in April 1977 reflected collective relief rather than spectacle. The Miami Herald published a restrained retrospective column describing the inquiry as emblematic of a maturing investigative era, one in which laboratory detail slowly replaced informal speculation. Broward and Dade County stations covered the sentencing in short afternoon segments, avoiding the dramatization that often accompanies coastal crime narratives. Reporters avoided adjectives that would distort the measured tone of the case, focusing on the rarity of a homicide conviction achieved without overt physical evidence beyond trace materials and behavioral proximity. The physician, now a registered inmate in state custody, was transferred to a correctional facility in northern Florida, his case file sealed into routine inmate documentation. No follow-up interviews, memoir claims, or public statements emerged from him in the years that followed, reinforcing the case's underlying theme of removal, distance, and unembellished fact. Spring on Miami Beach washed away the winter residue that had dominated investigative timetables. Lifeguard rotations resumed standard schedules without police supplement. The beach entry point where the bracelet had emerged was discreetly regraded by municipal crews to address erosion reported after winter storms. Tourists returned, unaware that the sand beneath their umbrellas had once been cordoned by tape, photographed in pale morning light, and sifted for evidence by gloved hands. Locals, accustomed to the rhythm of logged cases and episodic indictments, allowed the matter to recede into urban memory. Yet in the police archive building near Meridian Avenue, the folder remained accessible for training review, its careful tab indexing demonstrating how understated materials can quietly withstand trial scrutiny. Sarah Donnelly's family returned to Gainesville after a final courthouse appointment in May, carrying documents, property receipts, and a sealed case summary that provided chronological clarity without graphic disclosure. Their presence in Miami had been marked not by protest or public plea, but by adherence to investigative cadence. They attended scheduled review sessions, cooperated with forensic timelines, and allowed the legal process to move without pressure or derailment. Their departure corresponded with a reduction in downtown station foot traffic, and officers noted the absence of family seating in waiting areas where, for months, stillness had often accompanied their visits. At the art gallery where Sarah last worked, subtle adjustments marked an acknowledgement of loss. Her desk was reassigned, inventory logs updated, but the quiet space where she handled promotional catalogs and coastal prints retained its minimal layout. Gallery patrons browsing watercolor depictions of Biscayne Bay remained unaware of the case that had briefly intersected the storefront. Throughout summer 1977, internal police training sessions referenced the Donnelly case during modules on shoreline evidence recovery and fiber trace analysis. Younger detectives studied the grain composition charts that had ruled out long-distance tidal displacement of the bracelet, as well as microscopic photographs of the engraving abrasions that separated original jeweler craftsmanship from later unauthorized alterations. The maroon sedan, documented through rental agency records and chain of custody forms, appeared in instructional slides as an example of how vehicle trace can remain even after professional cleaning and multi-state return. Crime lab technicians emphasized the incremental nature of the findings. No single test dominated, no singular witness overturned the investigation, and no spontaneous confession altered the trajectory. Instead, steady iteration, re-examination, and confirmatory clarification produced cohesion without the need for dramatic courtroom reenactments. Miami Beach itself shifted into late 1970's development, with new condominium towers, expanded marina access, and rising seasonal population. The coastal stretch where Sarah's bracelet was found became more frequented, its once quiet patches integrated into broader tourism. Yet the investigators who first arrived at dawn on that July morning retained image recall of the moment. The tide low enough to expose a glint that might have gone unnoticed on a busy afternoon, the sand compacted from overnight humidity, the horizon muted before sunrise bleached the line between water and air. That preserved clarity was not shared beyond official channels, not converted into dramatized narration, nor reissued for public consumption. By 1978, with the appellate window closed and no procedural irregularities identified in the handling of evidence, the Donnelly case transitioned fully into resolved archival classification. Storage conditions in the climate-controlled police wing ensured the bracelet and associated fiber samples remained protected. Officers who later encountered the sealed evidence box during rotation commented only on its precision labeling and absence of excessive documentation. The box, like the case, met completion without amplification. The physician served his sentence without contest, legal petition, or claims of mishandled testimony. His professional licensing board issued a revocation notice that received minimal coverage outside medical legal bulletins. Miami residents, more attuned to seasonal changes and shoreline developments, did not track his incarceration milestones. The crime that intersected the city in the heat of 1976 dissolved into background docket memory rather than lasting notoriety. It became neither cautionary folklore nor touristic trivia, simply a record of coastal investigation completed with procedural discipline. In retrospect discussions within the department, senior detectives cited the case as instructive precisely because it avoided categorical extremes. It was neither an unsolvable disappearance nor a confession-driven trial. It advanced through small confirmations. The bracelet's atypical wear pattern, the gallery timestamp alignment, the engraving kiosk memory, the maroon sedan fiber match, the sand composition profile. At no stage did investigators depend on speculation outside evidentiary boundaries. The absence of theatrics protected the integrity of both the inquiry and the trial, allowing the facts to assemble without additional narrative weight. As Miami Beach continued to expand, the shoreline remained unchanged in its essential indifference, waves depositing and retrieving fragments with measured continuity. The bracelet that marked the beginning of the investigation no longer rested there, but in a quiet family home north of the city, preserved as an item that required no explanation beyond its recovered state. The case closed without broadcast documentaries, anniversary specials, or speculative editorials. Its place in the record was secured by accuracy alone. For Miami's forensic community, it remained a benchmark not of sensation, but of steady, evidentiary clarity, a reminder that even among neon signage and restless coastlines, resolution can arrive not with noise but with meticulous coastal stillness. The following years passed without commemorative articles, dramatized retrospectives, or renewed investigative angles, because none were required. The Donnelly case remained resolved through its original evidentiary sequencing, a closed circuit of coastal trace, vehicle fiber, engraving residue, and consistent witness memory that needed no later correction. Miami Beach entered the 1980s with heightened patrols, improved evidence storage protocols, and a revised missing persons workflow partly influenced by the structural clarity demonstrated in Sarah's file. Uniformed officers who had been in their first year of duty during the summer of 1976 ascended into supervisory roles, carrying the memory of a dawn shoreline scene that had permanently shaped their forensic sensibilities. The bracelet, once half lost to tide and sand, became a case study annotation rather than a circulating exhibit, and its final location in a quiet Gainesville residence allowed the narrative to conclude without public reclamation. By 1983, the art gallery where Sarah worked transitioned ownership, the watercolor prints replaced by more contemporary coastal photography. Inventory tables were refurbished, and the archives of sales slips that had once anchored timeline verification were shredded in accordance with standard record disposal protocol. Yet, even amid modernization, the gallery's longest-serving employee, who recalled providing testimony in unemotional, sequential phrases, maintained a private recollection of the summer week when law enforcement paused in the doorway to confirm timestamps. These details remained internal, preserved not through documentary productions or repeated media inquiry, but through professional memory embedded within Miami's cultural infrastructure. In law enforcement academies across Florida, the Donnelly case entered coursework not as sensational high drama, but as precise procedural mapping. Cadets studied the fractional differences in sand grain deposition that ruled out alternate tide origins. They reviewed the engraving abrasions measured beneath laboratory light, noting how tool pressure revealed unauthorized modification. They considered the maroon sedan not as a symbol of narrative intrigue, but as a controlled chain of custody example, showing how fiber remnants can persist beyond cleaning cycles and cross-state returns. The case demonstrated that in the absence of witness confession or overt physical harm indicators, the system could still arrive at lawful closure through accumulation rather than spectacle. Throughout the 1990s, as Miami Beach reconstructed its civic identity amid rising financial districts and shifting resort architecture, only occasional mentions of the case surfaced in legal conferences among state prosecutors. What was emphasized was not the emotional gravity, but the structural restraint that held the evidentiary line firm. Prosecutorial memoranda cited it when addressing cases without central witness narrative, suggesting that cohesion mattered more than momentum. The Donnelly file, when referenced, symbolized the assurance that forensic patience remained sufficient even in an era increasingly framed by media visibility and accelerated public expectation. The physician, serving a life sentence under state classification rules, entered the correctional system without requests for appeals beyond basic procedural review. He spent his incarceration years largely unremarked upon by press or public. Medical journals of the late 1970s and early 1980s issued brief notes indicating licensure revocation and legal status, but did not pursue retrospective analysis of motive or psychological framing. His absence from the professional landscape was complete, and his presence in the penal record silent. For archivists, this lack of narrative expansion only reinforced the thematic contour of the case. No exaggeration, no retrospective mythology, no sensational reanimation. The bracelet, placed within a protective case and stored in a modest hallway cabinet in Gainesville, rested without interpretive overlay. It fulfilled no symbolic burden beyond its material role as the investigation's point of origin. Visitors who entered the home in later decades rarely asked about it, and it was never presented as a household artifact requiring context. Its legacy existed exclusively in the precise domain of legal resolution rather than emotional display. For Sarah's family, the absence of public storyline became its own form of stability, allowing her memory to remain centered on personal recollection rather than civic infamy. Miami Beach itself continued its cyclical renewal. Hurricane seasons, redevelopment phases, shoreline conservation projects, lifeguard tower repaintings, hotel demolitions, and neon sign replacements. Tourists walked the same tide line without awareness that beneath the surface lay the site of a meticulously documented recovery moment. Patrol logs from subsequent decades noted ordinary incidents: lost towels, abandoned beach chairs, mislaid cameras, without any thematic tie to the quiet forensic milestone that occurred on a July morning in 1976. The normalcy of the coast returned fully, uninterrupted by lingering myth. In 2001, during a municipal archive digitization effort, the Donnelly case underwent database entry verification. The process was administrative, involving barcode assignment, microfilm transfer, and cross-referencing of courtroom transcripts. The archivist who completed the work reported no irregularities, no missing signatures, and no interpretive gaps. The case, even when converted into modern storage formatting, retained its internal coherence. It required no annotation beyond statutory headings and procedural timestamps. Of all the archived coastal investigations from the mid-1970s, it was noted as one of the most structurally intact. Over the course of the next 2 decades, the case remained dormant, neither reopened nor reframed. No new witnesses emerged, no claims arose suggesting alternate narratives, and no forensic reanalysis requested further sampling. The resolution maintained equilibrium without adjustment. Occasionally, in retirement gatherings among former Miami Beach detectives, the case was referenced not for its emotional impact, but for its evidentiary discipline. It served as a reminder that coastal investigations need not conform to public expectation of spectacle to achieve durable closure. By 2020, Miami Beach had transformed beyond recognition from its 1976 configuration, but the shoreline continued its predictable erosion and renewal cycles. Traffic along Collins Avenue intensified, high-rise hotels replaced mid-century motor courts, and art fairs redefined visual culture in the region. Yet within the police archive server, the Donnelly case remained unchanged, its metadata indicating completion, its forensic documents locked in permanent verification status. New officers joining the force encountered the file only when studying forensic lineage. They read it not as an emotional narrative, but as a demonstration of cumulative proof. In the quiet continuity of official memory, that dawn retrieval of a small, salt-marked bracelet remained the only moment in which uncertainty threatened permanence. Every subsequent hour pushed the case toward alignment, not through revelation but through unembellished precision. No anniversary coverage arose, no community mural or commemorative dedication was proposed, and no documentarian arrived seeking retrospective access. The case did not expand, distort, or re-enter broadcast circulation. It rested in completed form. Thus, the final outcome endured not as cinematic closure but as forensic conclusion. Miami Beach moved forward, the gallery catalogs dissolved, the rental car retired, the courtroom transcript sealed. Sarah Donnelly's name remained within legal record, and beyond that in the private life of family whose grief did not become public narrative. The shoreline continued its quiet exchange with the tide, and the investigative system that once knelt in morning sand maintained its proof in silent, enduring order.